Should we get started?
I think so.
All righty. All right, so that's me. I'll introduce myself. I'm Yuki. I grew up in the suburbs of Houston, and I actually went on my first hike when I was 21 during a college internship in Colorado. After graduating with a degree in computer science, I ended up taking guiding jobs in various settings in Alaska, Japan, Guatemala, and most recently in and around Yellowstone. I've been based out of Mosby, Montana, where I currently am a software engineer at onX Maps. And on the weekends, I enjoy trail running and climbing and wildlife photography. Last summer, I climbed the Grand with two of my climbing partners via the Owen Spalding route.
Awesome. Thanks, Yuki. I'm Charlie Avis. I'm a product manager at onX Maps. So Yuki and I work together there. I am a ski mountaineer, a trail runner, a little bit of climbing thrown in, and based out of Bozeman, Montana. So love to run around in our local mountains there. I climbed the Upper Exum route, which we'll talk about today, in 2020 with some friends, and have also had the luxury of standing on the Grand in wintertime, skied the Ford Stettner. So psyched to hear what Z has to say. So next time I go up there, I don't suffer as badly as I have before.
All right, what's up, everybody? Thanks for joining. My name's Z, or Zahan, and I'm the owner of the Samsara Experience. We're an online training company that helps athletes from a lot of different backgrounds discover their innate athletic potential. And I'm also a mountain guide, so I've spent most of my career guiding in the Tetons, where I live. I live in Jackson, and the Grand is my home mountain. I've spent a large part of my career guiding climbers and skiers up and down the mountain. I know we have some on here tonight. I know Steve Baldwin's here, who's a client that I guided years ago. So shout out to Steve and any others who I've had the chance to climb with. And so I've really worked on both sides of the equation, both as a guide and getting to see people of all different walks of life embrace the challenge of climbing a really big mountain. And then I've also worked as a coach, helping those athletes develop the fitness and the strength to succeed in the mountains. And I thought I'd tell a quick story that really kind of encapsulates where all of this came from for me. And in 2003, I took a fall while climbing, and I ripped all of my gear out and I broke my back. And it was a very scary accident. I shattered my wrist, and it really set me back from my lifelong passion of rock climbing. And during that time, as I was recovering, I realized that climbing wasn't going to be on the horizon for me for many years, a couple of years. And that's really where I discovered my love of running. And through running, and then eventually taking that type of endurance and applying it in the mountains, that's really where I kind of came to the realization that, like, wow, we are so adaptable as a species. Humans can train and see incredible results that they never thought possible if they just understand a little bit about their own physiology, the way our bodies work. And when we can cooperate with that physiological process, we can do anything. We can become incredibly strong, we can become snappy and powerful, or as we're going to talk about today, we can develop steady state all day endurance. And that's really kind of the heart of what we're doing today. And that's really what I learned in that period of becoming a runner and really learning the secrets of endurance training.
Cool. Thank you, Z.
Totally.
Cool to learn about you. So today, what's on the docket? We will do an intro to the Grand Teton, and then Z will dive into how to train for the different parts of that, the approach, the climb, the descent. After we talk about all the training for those different parts, and there will be Q&A throughout there. So feel free to open up your Q&A box and type in questions as we go through that section. And then next we'll have giveaways, and at the very end, we'll have more Q&A. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's class, we'd like to offer everyone here today an exclusive discount to both onX Backcountry and to the Samsara program. So take out your phones, and literally right now you can open up your phones and scan these QR codes, and that will take you to the discount pages for 30% off Backcountry. We don't normally give out 30%. This really is a special offer. After Thursday morning, it'll go down to 20%. So people who watch this on YouTube later, they'll have the 20% offer. And for the Samsara class programs, that offer is only available through Friday. So for people who are here today and for the next couple of days, you can get those discounts. So go ahead and scan those codes or click on the links that are in the chat to get those discounts.
Cool, everybody gotten it? Sweet. We're gonna dive in now.
Sweet, over to you, Charlie.
Awesome. So today we're here to talk about the Grand Teton, and obviously Z knows that mountain better than most people. And so really excited to hear what he has to say about how to prepare. Quick overview. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Grand. It's the second tallest peak in Wyoming. But from the trailhead at Jenny Lake, it's 14 miles round trip with elevation gain around 7,000 feet. And a summit elevation of 13,775. So big numbers. And add on top of that, that 7 miles in the Teton range is not quite like 7 miles elsewhere. It's technical terrain, it's big terrain, route finding is a challenge. And so because of all of that, like margin for error is thinner. And so being prepared is extremely important. We're going to break down the climb today in 3 segments. And like we said, Z will kind of talk through each of those segments and kind of what is like ways to think about training and preparation for it, as well as just like visualizing what you're going to need to do, in advance of your trip. So the approach from the trailhead to Lower Saddle, the climb itself, which today we'll kind of be talking about the Upper Exum route, which is a popular 5-5. Or 5-6 route, and then the descent itself. So to do that, I'm going to jump over to our onX Backcountry web map so we can get a good visualization. Make sure that we're can show you kind of the routes that we'll be talking about and like what the key moments of this plan are. So here we're looking at Grand Teton or the Grand Teton Massif, like in Grand Teton National Park. And you can see, Jenny Lake trailhead down here, the bottom right, or Lupine Meadows. And we've got our route mapped out. We've got our approach up to the Lower Saddle, which is a very common place to camp and turn into a 2-day mission. As well as the Upper Exum route on the technical, upper slopes of the mountain. And then, of course, we'll talk about the descent as well. But Z, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's talk about the approach.
Let's do it. Great. Okay, so our thought in this presentation tonight is that we're going to divide the mountain into 3 parts, 3 logical parts as you'd experience it. And we're going to use each part to focus on one aspect of training. So about 6 months ago, we started this process in partnership with Exum to build a training plan specifically to help climbers who are coming from all around the country, many of whom are coming from places where you don't have access to vertical or steep terrain, to train for the Grand. And all of our training plans are built around this idea that there's essentially 3 pieces to the athletic puzzle for all types of endurance sports. There's the endurance part, there's the movement part, and then there's the strength part. So we're going to use this map to divide the route into those 3 parts. And in this first part, we're going to talk about the approach, which approach is really just another word for hiking, meaning that it's non-technical, but it's also the most fatiguing because you're covering so much ground and so much elevation. And because there's no technical element, you're moving consistently throughout it. You're not taking breaks as you would be on the upper mountain. So I think, Charlie, should we just dive in and start talking about training for the approach?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to use this approach segment to really focus on aerobic conditioning. And if there's one thing that I've seen through the hundreds of clients that I've guided up and down the Grand, the single biggest roadblock to success, it's very simple. It's a lack of aerobic conditioning. That's the biggest thing. And that's just because the Grand it rises so dramatically. So it's 7,000 vertical feet. It's usually done in 2 days, often in 1 day nowadays. And aerobic capacity, aerobic conditioning, this first part of the equation, is all about efficiency. It's all about efficiency. It's not about power. It's not about speed. It's not about intensity. So it doesn't mesh very well with the way that a lot of people are training. If they're going to hit classes, if they're going to CrossFit and things like that, that's not going to help prepare you for this type of challenge, because this type of challenge is all about energy efficiency. And the way I would describe it is like this, right? Like, as a human being, whenever you do anything athletic or otherwise, your body has 3 different engines that it can rely on, and each engine powers a different type of work. And that's part of what makes us as humans such amazing athletes, is that we can be really efficient, or we can be really explosive, or we can be somewhere in between. So this engine that is going to take us to succeed on the approach, and frankly on the whole day, because it's going to be a big long day, is going to be about efficiency, right? Like if you had to drive a Ferrari from Jackson to Denver, it doesn't matter how fast the Ferrari is, because if the Ferrari runs out of gas, it won't get there. And that's just how it is, exactly that way when we're thinking about climbing the Grand. It's not going to be helpful to train in a way that's very intense, because this type of exercise is going to be very low intensity and very, very long. So we'd rather have a Prius than a Ferrari or a drag racing car. So how do we train our Prius? How do we improve the efficiency of our aerobic system? I got 4 strategies for you, and they're pretty simple. They are: go long, go slow, avoid rests, and train fasted when possible. So let's go through and break down all of those. And at the end of this section, before Charlie kind of flips to the climb, we're going to have a quick moment for Q&A, and I'll answer any questions that Charlie or Yuki feeds to me. So you can feel free to post any questions in the Q&A. So go long. Endurance is just like it sounds. It's about the ability to endure. And so if you want to improve your endurance, you have to give your body something to endure. Now, if you're in the weight room and you're trying to improve your strength, the thing that you have to overcome is the load. Whereas with endurance, the thing that you have to overcome is time. It's the ability to keep going, not to go very fast or to go in short spurts. It's to maintain that pace. And as you subject the body in training to prolonged exercise, your body becomes more and more metabolically efficient. In other words, it becomes more and more able to use energy that's widely available in the body, rather than energy that's in short supply. And what we know about our physiology is that if we are primarily burning fat as our fuel, then we've got fat that can last us days and days, even weeks, right? We know that because people have fasted for days, weeks, even months. So if we're primarily burning fat, we're going to find that we're much, much more efficient, and we feel better. In other words, 2, 3, and 4 hours into the mission, you don't have that kind of dreaded, depletion and fatigue. Instead, you feel like, hey, as long as we're not going any faster, I can keep doing this. So in your training, you have to dedicate at least 1 day a week to going long. What does long mean? That's going to depend a little bit on the individual. So if you're using the Grand Teton training plan, in the very first tab, we're going to ask you, what is your current average weekly volume? How much do you currently exercise? You start there, and then it'll automatically program all the other weeks for you, and it'll gently ramp them up. That that long distance, that over distance 1 day a week should probably start in the range of 60 to 70 minutes. And ideally you're getting to that 2 hour, 3 hour mark. Now, climbing the Grand, if you're going to do it in a day, might take 14 hours. Do I need to go for 14 hours in my training in order to be able to climb for 14 hours? The great news is no, absolutely not. You don't need to. But what you do need to do is you do need to start pushing over that hour, 2 hour mark. And we'll talk more about some of the details that can really affect that. You'll find elite level endurance runners are now finding this, that even to prepare for 100 milers, you can prepare very, very well by doing much shorter distances if you use the right strategies during those distances. So that's going to lead me into my next three. So number one, we said, was going long, 1 day a week, go long, start wherever you're at, 60, 70 minutes, build up to a couple hours. Two is go slow. That might seem counterintuitive because, hey, I thought I was training. Training's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be exhausting. No, not really. Training has to mimic the effort that you're training for. So if the energy system that you're relying on is your fat burning aerobic system, then it only helps if you train in that system. And the most common mistake that I see all the time with athletes is they train too hard, right? So they are pushing a pace because they think that if it's harder, then it's going to have better results, but it doesn't work that way. If you want to improve the efficiency of your Prius, you got to drive the Prius. If you want to improve the efficiency of your aerobic engine, you have to stay in that sort of sub 70% range. You want to be able to go at a pace that is slow. So what does that mean for me? For you, think about it this way. When you're out doing these, stacking this aerobic mileage in this portion of your training, here are a couple cues for you that'll help you determine whether you're training at the right intensity or whether you're going too hard. One, could you hold a conversation? So if you're out for a run and you can only speak in 1 or 2 word sentences, you're going too hard. If you go out for a run and you can talk in paragraphs and there's no inhibition on your breathing, you're probably going a touch too slow. But if you can hold a conversation with a friend and check in, see how things are going and catch up while you're running, you're doing perfect. Another marker that's used a lot is, can you do the exercise while breathing through your nose? So nasal breathing is something that's being studied a lot in the science right now. And there's good reason to implement nasal breathing in your training. But one thing with nasal breathing is that it can be a helpful limiter to your intensity. You're not apt to go very hard while breathing through your nose. It's going to look weird. It's going to feel weird. It's not going to work well. So nasal breathing can be another way that you can think of, like, hey, at this pace, can I continue to ventilate adequately while breathing through my nose? And the third kind of cue I'll give you is the one that I use the most. I always ask myself when I'm doing my aerobic training, is my mind wandering? If I'm thinking about everything other than the run, then I'm probably in a perfect aerobic state. If I'm just sort of processing the day and my mind is just wandering, that means that I'm not so preoccupied with the work isn't so consuming and hard, therefore I'm in the right aerobic zone. So again, one, can I hold a conversation? Two, can I ventilate through my nose? Can I nasal breathe? Three, is my mind wandering? You know that feeling when you're running up a hill, it's starting to burn, you're sweating, you're thinking about the moment, you're fully engrossed in the moment. That's not the kind of sensation that we want when we're doing aerobic training. And of course, earlier we talked about going long. And in order to go long, we also have to go slow, right? There's an inverse relationship. The harder we go, the shorter we can tolerate it for. So go long and go slow, they go together. Now, number three is avoid rests. And this is the simplest way that I could tell you right now to massively improve your aerobic performance is stop taking breaks when you're doing your aerobic training. So this morning, I live in Jackson. I was skinning up the King. There's barely enough snow, but I was cruising up and I could see this party ahead and they were fit. They would rally for a minute and then they would stop and they would break. And then they would rally for a minute, they would stop and they would break. Every time you take a break, you're giving your body a signal that it should anticipate that you are going to take breaks, and during those breaks, it can recover, which means it can recycle ATP and reset itself to carry on. If you do that in your training, you're going to have to do that on the ground. You don't want to do that. I have seen so many times, I've had clients from New York and Minnesota and LA and all places where they're not in the mountains, they live at sea level, and we leave the trailhead at the same time as young parties of guys, and they take off just sprinting. And then we catch them at the meadows and they're laid out with their stuff all over the place and they're panting their brains out. Yeah, they went fast, but now they've got to recover. And what we find is that if we're able to keep in our fat burning zone by just tuning that pace down, like we talked about, nasal breathing, letting the mind wander, conversational pace, and avoid rests, you're going to be amazed at how long your body can sustain that work for. So when you're doing these longer runs, or even just your day-to-day 40, 50, 60-minute runs, hikes, bike rides, swims, whatever you're doing, do everything you can to avoid rests. If that means being a little bit antisocial on the trail, it's okay. You can ping them on Instagram later on. Sorry, I had to run by you. I had to keep going because I'm getting my workout in. But taking breaks is the surest way to undermine the quality of an aerobic workout. Even if your workout's short, even if it's 40 minutes, you can get so much value if you just simply don't stop. Don't go hard, but don't stop. So that's my third tip, third strategy, is avoid rests. Now, the fourth one is train fasted when possible. And I always am a little bit hesitant to tell strangers to train fasted, because fasted meaning without additional fuel, without eating, because it can be misinterpreted in a lot of different ways. But the reality is that as human beings, one of the amazing adaptations that we have in the animal kingdom is the ability to go for very long periods of time with very, very little fuel. And oftentimes, the longer the workout, the deeper we go as endurance athletes, the more we find that the science shows us we separate ourselves from every other species on the planet. There's many species that can outrun us, they're faster than us, but none can go for longer at the pace that we can go. And part of that is because of our fat burning system. And when you go slow, you will find that your body will tap into its fat burning stores, which will allow it to go for incredibly long periods of time. So if you start to just gently experiment with a little bit of fasted training, it can look like this. So if you're new to this, don't be afraid of it. And I would encourage you to actually take food in your pockets or in your pack while you're training. Because if you get into a situation where you're like, man, I don't feel good, I need to fuel, boom, you can do it right away. But if you get in the habit of going out the door without adding more food to your system, especially sugary foods, goo shots, and all these types of energy foods, those are going to top up your glycogen stores. Glycogen is the most readily available fuel source in the body. If your glycogen stores are topped up and it's readily available in your bloodstream, guess what? Your body's going to use that. It's going to rely on that. Whereas if you allow the glycogen stores to be lower, as you start to run, you'll burn through the most readily available fuel, the glycogen, and your body will learn to start to rely on its fat stores. And as it does that, it's going to massively increase your efficiency. So that's going to mean different things for different people. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to promote a culture where people, go out and bonk and wear themselves out and feel terrible and think, wow, that was great. I ran myself into the ground. I must have had a great workout. Actually, it should be the opposite. You'll find that with fasted training, because you don't have those spikes in your glycogen levels, you're going to find that as the workout goes on, it's strange, but you feel better and better and better. And it only happens if you go slow. If you try to train fasted and you go fast, you won't feel good. But if you train fasted and you go at that slow, steady pace that we were talking about earlier, you're going to find that you have this incredible, steady source of energy that our bodies have evolved for millions of years to be able to capitalize on. So that's my last one, is training fasted when possible.
Real quick, someone asked if you could define fasted. I'm guessing that they're asking for a definition on like how many hours. Can you give an example of what a fasted training might look like?
You know, I think it's very important for everybody to start with where they're at. So different, you know, like for example, if you are a long-time endurance athlete, your body is so fat adapted already that a fasted workout could mean that you wake up in the morning and you know, you go for a run at 11 and you haven't eaten anything and you feel fantastic. But for somebody who's not accustomed to that, who lives very close to their fridge and who's constantly snacking, fasted might just mean trying to not eat for half an hour or maybe an hour before your workout, and then experimenting with what does it feel to go for 30, 40, 60-minute run without eating. And again, back yourself up, take food in your pockets. But I don't want to give this one definition, because I think the problem that happens is everybody wants to aspire to the same standard, but our physiology is all unique. And the way that we come to our training is a product of our parents, how our parents lived, how we've lived through our childhood, and how fat adapted we are as individuals. So the only thing I'm saying is, hey, start with where you're at, go from there. Because if you improve your fat adaptation by 10%, by 20%, you're going to have such a better time on the mountain. It won't matter that there's somebody else out there who's more fat adapted than you are. It doesn't matter. Lastly, I want to say something on this. It's important because, and that's a great question that just popped up right there as well. Is not a contest of who can go the furthest without food, and it's not a, you know, chest pounding thing. When I come back from a fasted workout, I'm going to have a great meal. I'm going to hydrate well. I'm going to refuel well. But if I can do the endurance work while fasted, I can supercharge the results of my training. Now, there's a question out there. What about women? Should women also use fasted training? Because there's some research that suggests that women can experience adverse effects. That is definitely something to consider, but I will tell you this, that as a species, we have evolved this way. This is not like, fasted training isn't something that just came up, though it seems like it. It's a bit of a fad nowadays, but it's something that we have evolved towards in our physiology for millions of years. So it's something that we can all safely experiment with, male or female, but just don't make it a thing where it's a contest with yourself, and you know, you start to develop an unhealthy relationship with food and you celebrate being fatigued and hungry. That's not the idea. The idea is actually to tap into that fantastic energy that occurs when you're in a fasted state and your body can metabolize fat, of which you have in hundreds of thousands of calories of supply.
Something I'd like to, and I know it's not my expertise, but for females, there has been some research shown that during certain days of the cycle, fasting is totally fine, and certain days of the cycle, it might be not advised. So that's something for females to look into, is fasting around what part of your cycle you're in.
I think that's a great point. And something that maybe I'll add to that for everybody is, you guys, like, training should never feel like an imposition of something that somebody else told you to do. It should feel fantastic. It should feel great. You should feel like you're making progress. Yeah, you get tired when you train hard, sure, but training should feel great. So if something doesn't feel good, don't just continue to do it because somebody told you to do it.
So there's a couple questions as far as this part of the climb, the approach. I have a couple questions about what can replace running and trail running or road running. We have someone that is curious about what can replace running because of bad knees, and so they're limited on running, and then someone else asking about trail running or long road runs.
Great. So running has a lot of benefits for training for the Grand, but it has some limitations, because in running, your foot strikes the ground for a very short period of time. It's like a quick rebound. Whereas when you're hiking up the Grand, your ground contact time, the amount of time that your foot is on the ground in each step, is very long. because as your foot touches down, your knee and hip have to straighten in order for you to go up. So in other words, climbing the Grand, walking uphill climbing the Grand involves far more muscle work than a sport like running. So what other sports involve a lot of muscle work, a lot of change of joint angle under stress? One example would be cycling. But cycling has limitations as well, because cycling it's all concentric force. In other words, the load on your tendons, on your bones, and your joints is very low. So cyclists often do really well on the way up, but we need to train for the way down. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But if you don't have, I mean, the ideal is obviously if you have access to uphill trails, hiking, running, mountain biking. If you don't, you're going to, in the early phases of your training, it's April now, April, May, maybe into June, you can be really diverse. You can swim, you can ride, you can do a variety of different things. Stairmaster, I saw, great. That can work. As you get closer to the target event, you really want to start mimicking the loads and the pattern of movement that you're going to experience on the Grand. So that could mean that maybe if you're planning on climbing in July, sometime in June, you take a trip somewhere where you're going to go hike and go up and down and gain some real hiking mileage to supplement your training. But building the aerobic base over the next couple of weeks in what we call phase 1 in our Grand Teton training plan, you can really do it, in a lot of different ways. That could be cycling, that could be swimming, that could be running, it could be, Stairmaster, things like that.
One last question for this section real quickly. Can you, let's see, as far as overtraining goes, do you have thoughts around using training peaks to avoid overtraining?
Training Peaks is a training platform that you can use. Our training plan is an alternative to that, so I'm probably not going to promote Training Peaks, but when it comes to overtraining, a lot of that comes back to just having these good principles in place and building good aerobic foundation. Where we see overtraining really start to stack up is when athletes fail to recognize signs of fatigue as they accumulate. So it's totally normal to wake up the morning after your long run to feel a little bit sore, to feel like you maybe need an extra cup of coffee and a slow roll that morning. That's normal, healthy fatigue. When you start to get into overreaching and overtraining is when you start to have these residual effects that compile day after day, even if you're not training. You might start to notice declines in your mood, irritability, anxiety, weight loss, and an elevated resting heart rate. Those types of signs, are signs that you're overtraining. But again, a lot of the time that's happening is because an athlete is relying too much on going too hard. And I won't get too much into physiology right now, but understand that the impact on your body of going hard, where you're panting, you're feeling that burning sensation in your legs, your face is getting red, that level of intensity should not be a big part of your Grand Teton training, because you're not going to move like that on the Grand. You can't rely on that level of intensity for something that's going to last for that many hours. So follow the signs like I talked about, weight loss, muscle loss, irritability, trouble sleeping, things like that. And my second tip on that is reduce your reliance on high intensity training. Go back to aerobic base building, which is really what's going to help you succeed in all big mountains.
Awesome. Thank you, Z. Charlie, do you want to go ahead and show that next section for the climb?
Absolutely. And Z, while I'm setting this up, there was one more question that I thought maybe was worth. There's a few questions that came in about weighted training. as well, and the relationship between like walking with weight and endurance. So while I get the next session queued up, maybe you could speak to that.
Absolutely. That is a great question. I'm really glad somebody brought that up. The short of it is, I would say weighted training is something that you should only do at the end. What we're going to talk about in the next half hour here is that success on a mountain like the Grand relies on aerobic conditioning, which you talked about, but it also relies on strength. What people do is they try to go into this no man's land in between strength and aerobic training, where they load themselves up with these huge heavy packs and they walk up and down mountains because the thinking is, well, if it's harder, then it must be good. But the more you load your body up, the slower you go. And the slower you train, the slower you'll climb. So what I would say is that in the first, we call it phase 1 and phase 2 in our training system. So we have a 3-phase training system. If you are following in the Grand Teton plan, weeks 1 and 4 are all together, and then weeks 5 through 8 are all together. In those phases, I would say do no weighted hiking, anything like that. Do weight training, we'll talk about that in a minute, but don't do any weighted uphill, downhill. Now, if you're going for an overnight, and if you anticipate that your pack is going to be significant in weight, nowadays there's so much light gear, you can fly up the mountain even overnight, you might not even need much of a shelter, you could have a very light pack. In that case, don't even worry about any uphill weighted training. But if you're carrying a big heavy pack, if you're doing it in 2 nights perhaps, or you're somebody's more inclined to carry the kitchen sink, then in the last 4 weeks of training, start to mimic the load that you anticipate in your climb. That means don't go put 50 pounds in your pack. It's not necessary, but maybe you put 15, 20, 25. And you start to kind of marry the strength with the aerobic conditioning. And that can be a very, very useful late stage adaptation that can make your climb feel much more enjoyable. And I would say that particularly for those of us who are smaller. So me, I weigh like 140 pounds. So if I'm going on an expedition somewhere where I'm going to have to carry a 60-pound pack, then yes, I'm going to do some of that training, because my frame, 60 pounds on my frame is just a lot. So for smaller men and women out there, if you feel like the pack is a really significant portion of the load, then add some of that training, maybe 1 to 2 days a week in the last 4 weeks of training.
Awesome, thanks. So looking at the next section, the climb, like from the lower saddle up to the summit. We've mapped out here the upper Exum route. There's tons of data online, Mountain Project, what have you. But yeah, quickly just kind of going over the route, like starting at the lower saddle, we're going to go up and gain Wall Street here, which is a feature in the rock that you get to walk across like that. And then the real climbing begins, right? See, like kind of that's the golden staircase being the next pitch, is where we have to start thinking about, real rock climbing, like putting your hands on the rock and pulling through moves. Oops, sorry, that's not the right one. Once you've gained this ridge here, this is the upper Exum, this upper ridge. And so there's a couple of like iconic pitches that I've marked out here, and all of this will be able to be shared going forward. But again, like Mountain Project, there's great resources all over the place. But yeah, golden staircase is where we start rock climbing. And then you've also got the friction pitch, where and V pitch being kind of some of the iconic parts of this route, where and what some might call the cruxes. And so Z, how would one go about kind of training for it? We've put in our endurance base, we've gotten to the bottom of the or to the lower saddle, and now we've got to gain the summit. Like, what are the things that we should be considering in our preparation?
Totally. I mean, this is the part of the day that you really came for. You had to do the approach. That's the price to pay, if you will. It's not Europe. There's no cable car to the lower saddle. So we do that part. That part's maybe a little bit more rote. But the thrilling part, like the most fun part, the part that you're gonna have the photos of and the lifelong memories of, are the climb. And so I'm just gonna put my guide hat on for a minute here, and I'm just gonna remind you that if you do choose the Upper Exum route, which is an awesome route, such a fun climb, climbed it literally hundreds of times and have never gotten bored. It's just such a fun climb because of its position. You're on the south ridge of the Grand. You got Idaho off to your left and Teton Valley, Wyoming off to your right. It's just spectacular. You can see 5 or 6 different mountain ranges on a clear day, and you're climbing the spine of the Grand Tetons, the highest peak in the range by almost 1,000 feet. So it's awesome. But the biggest accidents and the greatest peril that you will face, in my opinion, is lightning. And the Exum Ridge, because it's a ridge, is especially exposed to lightning strikes. So before you make the move around the corner on Wall Street, which you don't ever want to have to reverse, it's a very difficult move to reverse, look over your shoulder to the west, look out at Idaho, look to the south, and make sure you're seeing clear skies. And that the forecast is for clear skies, because that will ruin your day, and worse if you get that wrong. So make sure you've got clear skies and you're not in the threat of electrical storms. So how do we train for this part of the climb? This part of the climb is all about movement efficiency, in my mind. And that's what I've seen guiding hundreds of clients up this mountain, is that I can think of so many great athletes who had triathlon backgrounds, marathon backgrounds. Maybe they were fit backcountry skiers. They had all the engine, they had the fitness, but when they come to this part of the climb, where, as Charlie said, you're actually going to start doing some climbing, they're so terribly inefficient because they're so tense and they don't know how to move. It does not matter how fit you are, you can burn every last bit of energy in inefficiency. So the key to like success on the upper mountain is just being in the flow. Your body's got to be in the flow. You've got to be moving efficiently. You watch a guide who's been up and down that route hundreds of times, and it looks like they're not even flexing, like there's no tension in their bodies. They're just rambling, and everything feels really, really loose and relaxed. Versus somebody who may be even fitter than them, but who's got so much tension in their body, and they're so gripped and they're holding on so tight, they're going to go to total exhaustion. It's like being in the weight room for an hour and doing something really heavy. It's like doing deadlifts all day. So how do we train this? And this is, in my mind, like, this is sort of the trickiest part of training, because obviously if you're a rock climber and you travel in alpine terrain, great, this may not be much of a concern for you. But if you don't live in an alpine place, how do you train for it? This is where, if in our training system, we call this athlete IQ work. And we've done a ton of work on helping athletes develop this movement fluidity. If you think about the movement pattern, I'm going to do my best here to describe it. But if you're in the training plan, just click on the athlete IQ links, because those are 15-minute workouts that you just press play and follow along. You don't need to listen to anything I'm saying. It'll be all there. But let me try to explain it. So, if you're climbing the Grand is somewhere in between walking on flat ground and vertical rock climbing, right? It's really, most of the route is about 50 degrees. So it's literally halfway in between flat and vertical. And the way that we naturally move, Charlie said it himself, your hands go down. You're not really pulling yourself up the Grand. You don't want to do that. You get exhausted. The terrain is too flat, but your hands are going to be on the ground. And what does that look like? It looks like crawling. And patterning crawling movements and crawling locomotion is something that you can do anywhere, in the park, in your house, in the gym, that can dramatically help improve the efficiency of how you move in that three-dimensional terrain. Because that's really what the upper Exum looks like. It's very three-dimensional. You're going up and down these towers, you're creeping around features, you're going down to these little cols, you're climbing up slab. And if you're efficient there, you'll be able to do it with very little tension. So yeah, it's hard to describe how I would sort of the specific movements, but again, athlete IQ is kind of what we've got there. Crawling movements, deep squatted positions, all can really help your brain to allow your body to better interpret the terrain. And that's what it comes down to. When your brain can look at the terrain and say, oh, I know exactly how to move over that. I'm going to be in this crawling kind of pattern. It just flows and you can do it really efficiently.
So we're running a bit tight on time, but I do want to ask at least one of the audience questions for this section. Someone says that in the past, they've depended on box steps for several workouts a day as it fits into a busy schedule. Are you a fan of adding box steps from a 12-inch box while in the gym?
Sure. I think I'm going to talk about that in the strength training part coming up. But yes, adding a box mimics that uphill step that we're going to need to make when we're in a steep alpine environment. So yep, that can definitely help. Sometimes what you see people doing is using box steps as an endurance workout, just going up and down, up and down, up and down. I don't think that's a good idea. It doesn't work well because in the mountains, we don't get to go back down. So that you don't get to mimic the continuous uphill. But from a strength training point of view, using a box can be a useful way to load your body and build strength, build tissue capacity in ways that'll help you on the climb.
Cool. Let's go on to the next section and we'll ask some more questions if we have time at the end.
Okay.
Cool. So next section, we've now summited. Here's a great picture of Yuki on the summit. Awesome. Way to go, Yuki. We can all experience that feeling. But you're only halfway there. You got to get down to the bottom. So Z, the descent being sort of the last segment of like how we would prepare for this, this adventure. Like, what are the things that we should be considering on the descent?
My experience is that the descent is where even really fit athletes can often experience the most discomfort. Uphill, you're walking uphill, maybe it's because the summit is still above you, but that type of work, even though it's hard and can be really fatiguing, it feels awesome. But pain and discomfort associated with going downhill is not muscle pain. It's joint pain, it's tendon pain. That stuff sucks. It can last a long time. It can result in injuries, and people vastly underestimate the descent. Now, I'll give you a little tip that I've used in my guiding for probably about the last decade. I found it can make a huge difference. And this is more of a strategy on your climb. And then later in a moment, I'll talk about the training. So my strategy is, because I've seen how much the down destroys people, crushes their knees, their hips, their feet. What I've started doing is I will often guide people to the summit in one day, come down to the lower saddle that afternoon, spend the night. So then what you do is, instead of breaking the uphill into two, you break the downhill into two. And that will dramatically reduce, especially I heard somebody say like, hey, I can't run because I have knee pain. Makes me a little nervous for you to think about climbing the Grand, because it's going to put a lot of stress on your knees. Walking downhill is very, very hard on the knees. So we're going to talk about training strategies, but that's one sort of like tactical strategy about how you approach the mountain that can really help, is spend the night, use your overnight, your rest on the way down, break the downhill into two. Another little adjustment I would make there is wear your running shoes. So like an ideal footwear kit, I'm not going to get too far into equipment. We could do that another time maybe. But a great strategy that a lot of us guides use is we wear very comfortable, even slightly loose fitting running shoes. And then we bring approach shoes with us on the climb. So then as soon as you get to the summit, or maybe when you get to the lower saddle, instead of being in somewhat tight kind of approach shoes, you go back into a really comfortable shoe that allow your descent to feel a lot better, is better cushion than an approach shoe as well. Almost most people don't need to take rock climbing shoes to climb the upper Exum. You're going to do it more comfortably in approach shoes, I believe. All right, now let's pivot. Let's talk training. So in this third part on the descent, I'm going to talk all about strength training. And strength training, we often think about as like, how do we train our muscles to get bigger? I'm not so interested in that because I don't think that strength training is going to be a huge part of succeeding on the way up. But strength training is the way in which we put very, very high loads in very slow, controlled ways on our joints and connective tissue. And if you do that in training, you will build thicker, denser, and stiffer, healthier connective tissue that will endure the difficulty of going downhill. When you're walking downhill, when you step, you're sort of crashing into the ground, you're falling, and you're falling lower than where you took off from. And that's why going downhill creates much more stress on the joints than going uphill. Because when you're going uphill, you're pressing up and your foot is landing higher than the foot below. So the force going into the ground is very, very low by comparison. So strength training is really, in my mind, primarily for protecting your joints and ligaments and tendons for the way down. So what are some strategies for strength training? First of all, we want to target the parts of our body that are going to experience the highest loads. And when it comes to running or alpinism, climbing mountains, most of that stress is going to be focused on the knee, and it's going to be focused on the front side or the patella side of the knee. Because that's really what the knee does. It's a braking joint. And when we go downhill and we land on our heel often, that load gets transferred right into the front of the knee. So we want to target that in training. Somebody was mentioning the step-up box. The step-up box could be a great training tool for that. Generally, what I would say with strength training is there's strength training from a muscle strength point of view, and there's strength training from a connective tissue point of view. What the science tells us about ways to train for those is that we're generally going to see the best results from a muscle and strength point of view if the load is very high and the duration is very short. So by short, I mean around 8 seconds. So that might just mean, like, if you're counting repetitions, that might just mean 3 reps. That's about how long it's going to take you to do 8 seconds worth of work. But that load should be very high. So as soon as you pick up that weight and you go to do that step up, you're like, wow, this is hard right from the get-go, and it's hard right till the end. So that 8 to 10 second range is a place that's going to be very, very effective for strength training. It's going to help enormously with your descent. What else would I say about that? If you're doing single leg work, which is what I would recommend, as opposed to doing it bilaterally on both legs, because that's obviously not how we walk, not how we travel in the mountains. We're on one leg at a time. Try to stay down deep in that part of the squat that's difficult. You'll notice as soon as you stand up tall and your knee straightens, that part feels really easy. And if you go into that easy part, you're releasing the tension on the muscle. You won't get the same adaptations. So stay in that zone of tension. Keep the loads high. Keep the duration short, 8 to 10 seconds. And there's one more thing I want to say on that. Move slowly. Strength training should be done very, very slowly. And don't go to failure. Don't go to the point where you're wobbling and falling over. It's not necessary. The muscles in your leg are going to, we call it achieve full motor unit recruitment. In other words, they're going to use all the strength that they've got by the time you're at about 80%. So you don't need to go to failure. It's only a way to get injured. Go hard, but don't go to failure. The other way to use strength training is to use it in a way that really targets our connective tissue. You hear me talk about this a lot because there's so much good science now about how we can really improve the health of our connective tissue. And when you look at people wandering down the trail, you can see that they are really sore in ways that are a result of connective tissue damage. Connective tissue is going to be trained best in longer and more isometric holds. So what does that mean? It means roughly 30 seconds, and it means you're choosing positions that you're static in. You're just holding that position. You're not moving up or down. So, like a single leg squat where you squat down, you're holding a weight and you hold that for 30 seconds all the way to the end, to when you are cringing and you can barely hold on. Those types of long duration holds are going to be very healthy for your connective tissue if you can do them right. So again, in the training plan, there's a lot more detail about how to do it. I'm just trying to hopefully give you some tips that will enable you to, implement some of this stuff.
Awesome. Z, a couple of questions for you as we reach the end of the hour. And Yuki, you might have more from the Q&A section too, but few things have come up around elevation, and is there a significant increase in red blood cells from sleeping at high elevation, and the Grand Teton being at 13.7, definitely high for folks coming from sea level. How would you kind of think about preparing for that?
That's a great question. And most of my experience is, again, observing clients who are coming from sea level. What I find is that, you're absolutely right. 14,000 feet, 775, that is high. But most people will find that they can come in, acclimatize for a few days. And if they follow good principles of moving at that slow and steady pace, will succeed at that elevation. Yes, you can start to, implement some strategies of sleeping high, but the problem there is that you're really, in order to maximize that, you're probably going to need to sleep high and then come back down. So do you really want to go all the way up there, sleep high, come all the way back down, and then subject yourself to that all over again? It's hard. If you're in town for a few days, maybe even a week or two prior, something that could be really worthwhile is take a ride up the tram, and then you're at 10,500 feet. Go for a hike up there, then come back and recover and sleep low. If you do that once or twice, you're going to start to accelerate that process. That's going to make your adaptation to elevation that much easier. But honestly, my experience over 10, 15 years of guiding is that people have a lot of concern about that. I understand that, but I see most people succeed pretty well at that elevation. Very well, in fact.
Awesome. And one last one, which I'm kind of grouping a couple questions together into a theme, but there's a couple of questions about route finding, like best way off the Grand for coming down the OS. Once you commit to to Wall Street, are there ways to escape off the XM route? As specific as you want, but also just curious, how, what's your approach? Obviously we've sort of, visualized and mapped out a plan here to some extent, but what's your approach to getting beta and visualizing a plan, going into a trip like this, and making sure that you have all the route finding information that you need?
Absolutely. So, one way to reduce your route finding stress on any mountain is to descend the same way that you climbed. And you don't want to descend the XM ridge. So what you can do, especially if climbing a big mountain like that feels like, wow, that's a big step for us, that's sort of at my limit, I'm not too sure, climb the Owen Spalding, because then you'll get to suss the route on your way up, and you'll gain familiarity with the same part of the mountain that you'll retreat down. Now, you don't actually retreat down the exact same way, but you retreat down in a very, very similar way, and you'll be able to piece things together. So, that's one thing. If you do choose to climb the XM Ridge, the route finding challenges really begin at what we call the Brig Slab. And the Brig Slab is the first time that most people will rope up. It's a short, maybe 30-foot slab of rock that there's no easy way around. There are other ways around, but they're equally challenging. And as you get to that little crux, that first crux, as soon as you're done with the Brig Slab, you've climbed on top of it, that's where the route finding challenges begin, because what you essentially are doing is you're not gaining any more of elevation, you're just traversing the mountain all the way out to Wall Street, which is basically well east of you. So that's a part of the route to focus on, is the Brig Slab to Wall Street. As soon as you crest over just after the Brig Slab, you're going to be able to look at the whole south ridge of the Grand. And if you've studied the route and you've used the onX map, you're going to immediately be familiar with some of the terrain. Oh, there's this and there's the ridge, and you're probably going to see people on the skyline making those moves around, and that'll help. When you start climbing the Exum Ridge, are there opportunities to bail off? Yes, there are, but it's complicated. For one, because most of the escapes are going to require 2 60-meter ropes, which we generally don't carry. Up higher on the mountain, before you summit, there are places where you can dip off to the left, to the west side, that allow you to make quicker return to the Owen Spalding and the descent route. But honestly, the short of it is that once you start the Upper Exum Ridge, you kind of want to finish it. It's not a fun place to bail from. And really the two reasons that, people bail is, one, because it's too late and it's getting dark, or two, because of weather, particularly thunderstorms. And before you make the move around the corner on Wall Street, if you look over your shoulder, you're going to be able to see for, usually a couple hundred miles, and you can see if there's weather brewing or not. And if you're short on time, go the Owen Spalding route, because you can turn around at any point and just start returning down. Then maybe the last thing I'll say is, if you do climb the ridge and you're successful, you summit, the last bit of the route finding crux would be from the summit to the rappels. Now, every single person, pretty much every single person that climbs the Grand is going to use those same rappels. So chances are there's going to be lots of other people making their way down there. The rappels are a dangerous place because there's a lot of loose rock there. So it has some other hazards, but from a route finding point of view, you are helped a little bit by the fact that pretty much everybody else is going there.
Sweet.
Oh, one little piece of beta. You can rappel with a 60-meter rope off the 60-meter anchor if, when you get to the anchor, you throw your rope to the skier's left. If you throw it straight down, your ends are going to end up in midair and you won't be able to get off your rope. But if you throw it to the left, you'll land on a platform. 60-meter works.
Awesome.
I'm remembering that section just now, actually. Real quick, thank you for everyone who's been, I'm so stoked that most everyone's still on this call, even though we're going over. Let's do the giveaway real quick, and then we'll get into some more Q&A, because we do have a lot of questions, but I want to make sure that as many people as possible can enter the giveaway that we have. So Charlie, whenever you make it to the next slide.
Cool. We've gone through all that. There we are.
Awesome. Go for it, Charlie.
Yeah, so we're doing a giveaway. By an onX Backcountry account is required if you sign up for an onX Backcountry account through that bit.ly link right there, or scanning that QR code. You'll be entered into a giveaway for an onX hat. And I think there's some other stuff in the giveaway.
Yeah, you can also click that link, and then you'll be entered for the Patagonia giveaway. So these things that are pictured are what are being given away to people who go through that link and enter tonight, and it closes at midnight.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think some backpacks and pants and jackets. So yeah, sign up for onX. We will, winners will be notified by email tomorrow, presumably.
And remember, a basic account, if you're not ready to pay for the premium account, even with 30% off, which is a really good deal tonight, but you can get a basic account for free. And so that will make you eligible to win as well.
Awesome. I'll pause on that. Click that bit.ly if you have a second. I think it's been floating around in the chat too, so should be good. Any last Q&As? I mean, we've been trying to answer questions as we go, and Z's done an awesome job with that.
Yeah, I've got a couple questions that have been queued up for me. Do you have any suggestions for people who want to solo hike the Grand Teton, or just go by themselves without a partner?
Enjoy it. It can be a great way to climb the mountain. It's a personal choice around risk. Obviously, it's super exposed. The climbing's not that difficult, but there are some insecure sections of 5-4 climbing. And then, the descent, obviously you don't have the rappel, so you're going to have to reverse the climbing. And the problem there a little bit is that can get quite bottlenecked. So thinking about what times a day you want to be doing the descent can be helpful, because you're going to have to down climb what everybody else is trying to come up. So it does present some challenges. But for some people, that's going to be a really fun way to climb the mountain. If you're comfortable with exposure and being ropeless in technical terrain.
Awesome. Things to eat to break your fast while training other than goos.
Yes, great. So, if I come back from like a nice long run and I did it fasted, I'm just going to eat a very well-rounded meal. We know that protein is going to be essential for rebuilding. That's what protein does in the body. It helps us rebuild bones and tissue, muscles. All of those are protein reliant tissues. So, that's that role. But then if we've depleted our glycogen stores, then we're going to need fuel as well. Fuel can be fat and carbohydrate. So for me, common meal after I come back I do a lot of my aerobic work in the morning. I'm going to come back, I'm going to have a few eggs. I'm going to fry up some vegetables, and I'm probably going to mix them all together in a sandwich. But, eating well-rounded, healthy food with a lot of vegetables as well as protein component is going to be a really good meal. And one last thought on that, because we didn't talk about this during the climb, is if I'm going to do something, like if I'm going to train to go climb a big mountain, I'm not going to climb the mountain fasted, right? That's important. Like, the training is going to allow me to feel better on the mountain, but when I'm there, I'm going to eat to my heart's content, because I want to perform my absolute best there, so I can do certain things in training that'll enable me to perform better. But then on the mountain, eat as much as you want.
Sounds good. Yeah, something that one of my running friends gave me the suggestion of is practice eating what you might want to bring on the mountain. Like, so I have gone out from my house and eaten like banana peanut butter sandwiches for a 3-mile run, just to see how I feel with that in my stomach.
Absolutely. Makes good sense. Yep.
So another question, is there a significant increase in red blood cells from sleeping at high elevation?
Yeah, I mean, sleeping, exercising, being at high elevation, subjecting your body to a high elevation environment is going to start to accelerate those adaptations to elevation. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh,
what were you gonna say?
No, that's it. Yep.
Okay. Next question, is a single push on the full exum the preferred way?
Okay, so the full exum refers to climbing the lower exum and the upper exum together. And doing that as a single day push is awesome. It's a great way to do it. The challenge there is that the lower exum is very difficult to pass people on. So you have to sort of accept that whatever position you get in line, you're probably going to be stuck there until you get to the upper exum. Now, in the upper exum, there's loads of different ways to go. It's easy to cruise around people. And the lower exum has become a very popular route in the last 4 or 5 years. So, trying to figure out a way, again, to manage the timing can be tricky there. What I found generally is that if you're fit and able, then maybe getting a slightly later start and letting the early crowd get ahead can be good. And then you catch up to them on the upper exum. And then, you can cruise by them there. But yeah, absolutely. Lower exum in a day. That's how my wife and I climbed the mountain for the first time. We had a great time.
Awesome. So we have some people that want to know your preferred way of pronouncing route or route. I actually haven't noticed.
I don't know. Route. Yep. Whatever you like.
Logistics on getting to the Grand, backcountry permits, parking, etc. What's a good resource for that?
Sure. Okay. I imagine probably just Park Service website. You don't need a permit to climb the Grand, but you do need a permit to spend the night in Grand Teton National Park. So that's a consideration, and sometimes that can be a reason to do it in a day if you have that kind of fitness. There's very limited camping sites at the Lower Saddle, which is probably the preferred sleeping spot. There's very few of them, so that's something you'd want to think about well in advance. If you can't get a site at the Lower Saddle, I would say personal preference here, but I would probably just camp in the meadows, which is your screensaver right now, pretty much. Camp down there because it's lush, it's green. Yeah, perfect. It's lush, it's green. It's flat, it's comfortable. Whereas the spots that are in between the Lower Saddle and the meadows are quite windy and dark and cold. They just feel a bit, they don't really feel like they're going to rejuvenate you. You're going to get a great sleep. That would be my take. Then parking has become a real challenge at the Lupin Meadows trailhead. So getting there early is very, very helpful. And most of them aren't just climbing the Grand, it's people just going to visit and walk around the trails. Those folks probably aren't showing up till, 8, 9 a.m. So if you're there early, you'll probably be fine.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Z. We have had a lot of other questions. We won't get the time to answer them right now. However, if you can always reach out to help at onX Maps for onX questions. And we just want to put the screen up again for the discount codes. Z, were you going to throw something else in if people had questions for you?
Yes, they can email us at wizard@Samsara Experience. And our 20% off code, we've never actually done 20% off training plan before. So take advantage of that, and that expires Friday. If you purchase training plan, you have questions, you can reach out to Wizard, Wizard@Samsara Experience, and we're psyched to connect with you. We're psyched to help you achieve your goals in the mountains and help you feel great doing it. Thanks for joining. Thanks for all your engagement and questions. It was fun.
It was a blast to have you, Z. Thank you so much. And
thank you.
Thanks so much, Z.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, everybody.
Thanks for joining, folks.